Hello everyone, this is Marcel. Welcome back to my channel. For today's discussion, I want to go over some natural functions that have been kind of twisted within society to suit one person over the other, depending on certain circumstances. I want to break down some interesting, almost even entertaining situations that I've been in the past, and sort of wrap it up with my views on the topic. First thing I want to throw in here, though, is that my country, meaning America, has a certain set of standards the way that things are supposed to operate and what is culturally acceptable or appropriate. Categorizing the stance on things can be difficult and almost regional because in some ways people are expected to be very modest, whereas in others there's quite the opposite. One minute you'll have people completely clothed and expected to behave in a certain way, and the next minute you'll have them rioting naked in the streets. The double standards could make your head spin. I'll get to that here in a minute and why I believe that it's even occurring. A lot of times you'll hear an argument about things that should be allowed because they're natural. They occur with the human body regardless of society, so they should be allowed within society, even out in the public view. So we'll go over that a little bit. Another thing I would like to crush is this whole bullshit about male nature versus female nature. Humans are a sexually dimorphic species, meaning men and women are not the same. They have different little fuzzy parts, they behave in different ways, and they serve different purposes. There is only human nature. Both genders have their own toxic little behaviors that make life more difficult. That is, if they're expressed unchecked to some degree. When women lie, cheat, and deceive, that is human nature. When men rage, fight, and compete, that is human nature. Segregation of the genders in these concepts only allows for people to pick and choose what they want to pay attention to. It's all just human nature. I may even make a more in-depth video on that specifically later on. It's an important message. So for me, the inspiration for this video came from an experience I had when I was very young. I was sitting in, I believe it was a McDonald's, if I remember correctly, trying to enjoy my burger or, whatever it was that I was eating. And from behind me I hear this loud, obnoxious, slurping, smacking sound. I just turned to look at a reflex and lo and behold, there's a woman breastfeeding in the middle of the restaurant. Now her attractiveness shouldn't matter for the sake of the point of what I'm trying to discuss here, but for the sake of context, the woman looked about equivalent to a mythical hag beast. And the experience from it is something that could scar a man for life. The moment I turned around, she snarled at me about how it was a natural function and I shouldn't be a pervert. Keep in mind, I was a young child at the time. Now I realize that that's not a huge deal when it comes to the great scheme of things, but it plays into a much larger problem that's present within society. Yes, little behaviors like that are natural functions. In many cases, they're required for the health of the baby when formula and stuff isn't necessarily an option, but considering that technology nowadays allows people to pump their own milk and put it in a bottle and use the bottle instead, it's more a matter of laziness. Perhaps personal preference as well. There are many things, however, that are also a natural function that are not allowed. For example, if I were to unzip and start pissing in a bottle under the table, I could imagine that a lot of people would be very offended. There's a good possibility I would even be charged, but why is it that some functions are allowed and others are not? Well, when we look at the reasons why certain behaviors are prohibited or discouraged, it's usually because of hygiene and the comfort of all those around. The reason why a lot of functions are refined to bathrooms is so that any pathogens and things are contained in that area. They don't come into contact with the food, right? Many a times I have left a restaurant when I've gone into their main bathroom and found that, for example, the soap dish was empty. Now we could make the argument about why that's unhealthy for the kid or just basically a distraction and a disturbance for those around, but it's really not relevant. The laws aren't written, or at least they're not enforced in such a way that certain things can even be approached as if they were offensive. Take, for example, with the whole urinating in public scenario. There are guys out there that are now registered sex offenders because they urinated in public and either were seen or even could have been seen by a minor. Not all states require that a minor be present in order for them to be charged as a sex offender. Supposedly, the reason they can be charged as such is that their genitals were exposed. But it's possible to be sighted away from public view anyway, like out in the middle of the woods, for example, if a cop happens to notice you. As a disclaimer, this varies by state, and I am not claiming to be an expert on any kind of law. Between the genders, when somebody has to take a pee, who is actually going to be exposed, or who is at least much more likely to be exposed? Well, the men, naturally, right? It's pretty hard to claim a medical emergency, which I think would be the argument against getting the charges, as a male without some kind of pre-existing condition that you could show. Come to think of it, I even heard a rumor that if you ever get pulled over, that you should claim you were defecating and that you're not urinating, simply because defecation, meaning taking a dump, can supposedly kill you if you don't do it in a proper amount of time. It can cause major problems. So regardless of what a person's doing, it might make sense to claim that it was defecating. I don't know how true that is, but it would only work if a person were bothering to sit down to pee. So it also becomes kind of a gendered issue. The point is that on average, if a guy is doing anything out in public along that lines, he's more likely to be shunned or even charged and arrested for it. Whereas for a female, it's generally assumed to be some kind of an emergency, and she might even be offered help. The point is that laws being written one way or the other does not mean in any sense that they're going to be enforced in every situation. The main reason most of these things are enforced, though, regardless of all of the decency involved in it, is because of hygiene, honestly. I've been to a few countries, for example, where people are allowed to just squat in the street and, do whatever they need to do and then keep walking. Nobody bats an eye to it, but I'll tell you this, I wasn't allowed to drink the water there. It was so ripe with microorganisms and stuff that I would be crapping my guts out for a month. So why is it there is far more tolerance when it comes to one gender than there is for the other? Back on the topic of breastfeeding, a store I used to work at years ago had an entire office dedicated to mothers that were going in to breastfeed. Nobody actually ever used it except the main female manager who wanted to store all of her crap in the fridge that was built in to store women's breast milk. You believe that? An entire office hacked away for that purpose. 8 years working at that store, I never saw it used once, though she swore that women used it all the time. I digress. It's possible that the reason why women are basically allowed to run around naked, piss in public if necessary, do all of this stuff that would arguably be more sanitary or more comfortable for everybody if they did not, and men are expected to hold a higher and more refined standard, may have to do with how society views women. You know who else gets away with that kind of behavior with maybe a slap on the wrist, if anything? Children. People see a little kid pissing on a tree, they're probably going to either run to help them or just tease them, maybe even laugh about it like it's a joke. But once people become adults, they're expected to behave a certain way. That standard just doesn't reflect on women, I guess. But if we're going to discuss natural functions in of itself, then allow me to share a little bit of insight. See, as a python myself, I gotta eat. So it makes sense that I would breed rats, right? Trying to prop up my fourth wall here a little bit. Let's say that I've bred tens of thousands of rats in big community cages that stack as high as my ceiling. I might even own my own business doing that for several years now, hint, hint. I prefer the community cages because it allows them all to interact and communicate and, be around each other and not in little tiny tubs, because I almost feel like the little tubs are cruel. But of course, that's just my preference. Thing is that it's fascinating to just sit back and watch the little fuzzy animals interact with each other. See, when you watch them long enough, you start to see a lot of resemblance between these supposed lower life forms and humanity. Not trying to segue into an animal rights argument there, of course. I'm just saying the similarities are astounding, but all of the negative behaviors that you see from people that are treated so toxically in society, you see them in those animals too. Things like rape, murder, infanticide, meaning the killing of one or someone else's kids, jealousy, aggression, even theft. I have seen at least things resembling all of those behaviors from these little fuzzy mammals. Now, before somebody makes the argument, well, of course, Marcel, those are rats. Keep in mind that rats and various other mammals like them are used a lot for human research projects because aside from the fact that they breed so rapidly, their behaviors are very similar. They're actually very intelligent. I've sat back and watched them unlock their cages from the inside right after seeing me do it. Trust me, they are frickin' smart. Aside from that, primates, monkeys and stuff, they are far worse. The reason why I bring this up is if anyone's going to make an argument about what is natural and something being a natural function and therefore it should be allowed, well, guess what? There are some truly horrible, disgusting, heinous things that occur in nature that as a refined society we deem as not being appropriate. Humanity, at least, has attempted to evolve beyond that. I suppose it's just some interesting things to think about. If you want to share some stories of your own, feel free to down below. Tell me what your thoughts are. Do you think I'm onto something here? Is any of this even an issue that we should worry about? Until next time, this has been Marcel. Like, share, subscribe to hear more.